Good afternoon. Welcome to another exciting edition of Reading with Mr. Eble. Still reading Grenade, and today we're going to start on the chapter called Fading Away. So here we go. Hideki heard Private Maida yell out behind him, but he didn't slow down to look back. Once he was outside the cave, he zigzagged this way and that for the cover of a low hill in the distance. It was cloudy and rainy, but it was daylight out now, and the water and the light in his eyes blinded him. His heart pounded like a hammer as he slipped and slid, juggling the grenade, the pack, and the rifle. The cigarette had already been drowned in the rain, and he let it fall into the mud. Hideki ran and ran, but unlike the Kijimuna that chased Hideki in his dreams, Private Maida didn't follow him. At the edge of a steep ridge, Hideki flung the private's rifle down into the ravine, where it sank into the mud with a splurch. He never once considered keeping it. Just carrying a rifle was dangerous. People with rifles shot at other people with rifles. He didn't know how to use the thing anyway. Yoshio and the old woman and the other Okinawans in the cave might still not be safe, but at least now they couldn't be shot by Private Maida. Hideki kept running. When his lungs gave out, he collapsed underneath the remains of an exploded American tank. He panted heavily, his body still weak from days with too little food and too little sleep, his head still ringing. He stuffed the unused grenade back in his pocket. How many other brushes with death would it help him escape from? Hideki wanted to go on, to look for Kimiko, but he felt himself fading. He was crashing from the adrenaline rush of his standoff with Private Maida, from running away. His escape had used up the last of his energy, and his sick, feverish body was giving up. If he didn't eat some food today, real food, he was going to die. It was time to try the food in Ray's backpack. Hideki tried one of the hard, unwrapped crackers first. It was tough to bite off, and it tasted like wood shavings, but Hideki was able to gulp it down. He wanted to wait, to see if the cracker was poisoned and would make him sick, but his hunger got the better of him. He bit off more and more, swallowing the dried bits of cracker as fast as he could choke them down. The second, third, and fourth crackers quickly followed the first. If they were poison, he was at least going to die with a full belly. The can with the key might have food in it too. Better food than the crackers. But what if it was some kind of explosive device instead that would blow up in Hideki's face? Surely he'd eaten enough crackers to buy him another couple days. But his body still shook with hunger and the anticipation of what might be inside the can. He would try it. He had to. Eyes closed, head turned, Hideki snapped the key into the can's lid and cranked it back. The smell that rose from the can made his mouth water. It wasn't an explosive device. It was potatoes and beef, real meat. In a daze, Hideki used the fork from the meal kit to spear a piece of beef. His hand shook as he lifted the morsel to his mouth, afraid he would drop it, afraid it might somehow go away or be taken from him at the last moment. He placed a mouthful on his tongue and closed his eyes. It tasted overwhelmingly of salt, but underneath it was the fatty, rich flavor of beef, something Hideki hadn't tasted since long before the battle began. Hideki chewed the meat slowly and fought his stomach's powerful urge to swallow it down quickly. Hideki's eyes watered at the sheer joy of it, and he cried softly. The food was so good, and it had taken him so long to eat it. He might even have lost the pack before he tried it, and the food hadn't been poisoned after all. It took all the willpower he had, but Hideki saved the rest for later. He would need it. His stomach still yawned, begging for more food, but he had bought himself more time. He felt solid again, less like a ghost. He repacked Ray's backpack, took off his clammy, wet jacket, and put both of them under his head for a pillow. His head still pounded, and he needed to close his eyes, to rest. In seconds, Hideki was asleep. He twisted and turned, his body still blazing with fever and shaking with hunger. And as he slept, he dreamed. He was being chased by Kijimuna again. The Kijimuna hurled pine cones at him that exploded like grenades, cratering the ground to Hideki's left and right. Hideki ran and ran, through rice paddies and around trees, up hills and over streams. But every time he turned to look over his shoulder, the Kijimuna was right there behind him, cackling and hurling more pinecone grenades at him. Boom, boom, boom. The evil sprite was chasing him toward the pine tree again, toward Ray, but this time the Kijimuna caught him first. It leaped onto his backpack and sank its long, sharp fangs into his neck, and Hideki jerked awake. He blinked in confusion. Hideki wasn't where he had gone to sleep. The blown-up tank, the muddy field, the pouring rain, they were all gone. He lay instead on a cot under a green army tent, a green American army tent. Hideki had been captured by the enemy. What? Things that aren't there. That's the next chapter. Hideki was a prisoner of the Americans. He turned to roll off his cot, to run away, but a man stood over him, silhouetted by the dawn. Hideki lifted a hand to shade his eyes. It was Ray. Ray, the boy he'd killed, was standing over him, a gaping hole in his side. Hideki's heart caught in his throat, and he sat up with a yelp. Suddenly, the ghost of Ray was gone, and an American doctor stepped into the space where Ray had once stood. Where had he? Hideki blinked and put a hand to his sore head, but instead of touching dried blood, he found a gauze bandage there, wrapped tight. You're all right, the American doctor said. It took Hideki a confused moment to realize the medic was speaking Japanese. The doctor handed Hideki 2 small white pills and a metal cup of water. Here, swallow these. They'll make you feel better, the doctor told him. Hideki put a hand to the place on his neck where the Kijumana had bit him. A small cloth bandage covered the spot. I had to give you a spot to help you sleep, the doctor explained. You had a nasty gash on your head, and we had to sew it up for you. It's still going to hurt for a while, though, and these pills will help. Hideki was afraid of the pills, but why would the Americans go to all the trouble of fixing him if they were just going to poison him now? He put the 2 pills in his mouth. They tasted like chalk, and he quickly swallowed them down with the water. Good boy, the doctor said. Looks like shrapnel from a grenade caught you. What happened? Hideki felt the blood drain from his face. He couldn't tell the doctor what really happened, that he'd been injured by his own grenade, killing an American soldier, killing Ray. I don't remember, Hideki lied. That may be a result of the concussion, he told Hideki. You may have problems with your memory, or problems with your eyes and ears, like hearing and seeing things that aren't there. Hearing and seeing things that aren't there. Was what was happening to Hideki? Was he hearing and seeing Ray because he'd taken a knock to the head, or because Ray's ghost was haunting him? Get some rest, the doctor told him, and maybe your memory will come back to you. In the meantime, I'll see if I can find you some shoes that fit you. When the doctor was gone, Hideki snatched a bottle of the little white pills from a tray and stuffed the bottle in his pocket. Then he got up from the cot and slipped out of the medical tent. All around the camp, American doctors and soldiers walked on boards laid down in the mud, and trucks unloaded more Okinawans, both injured and uninjured. None of them seemed to be prisoners. First, the food in Ray's pack hadn't been poisoned, and now the Americans had treated his wounds. He'd seen them be monsters, but he'd seen them be kind too. Maybe it wouldn't be so bad to surrender to them after all. But if the Americans ever found out what he'd done to Ray, they might not be so nice. Besides, he had his sister to find. Alright, last chapter for the day is called No Man's Land. So here we go. American star shells exploded in the sky above Hideki. Designed not to kill but to illuminate, the shells burst into bright, glowing stars that hung from tiny parachutes. It took the star shells about a minute to hit the ground, and in that time everything below them was lit up with a ghostly green light. For Hideki, it was like Americans were lighting his way south toward his sister. But it was also the way toward the dangerous front lines where the Americans and Japanese were still fighting. After a quick detour to pick up Ray's pack, Hideki had joined hundreds of Okinawan refugees walking in the same direction. He hoped the Americans would let him pass through safely with the refugees, and then he could press on farther south to find Kimiko. The Americans used illumination shells to watch for Japanese infiltrators at night. What the light showed Hideki and the other refugees were all the dead bodies around them. Some were Japanese, but most were Okinawan. They littered the muddy fields to each side and lay like stones in the road. But Hideki had learned to really not see them and keep moving. Seeing them, really seeing them, was too much to bear. Hideki felt the skin on his back of his neck crawl, like the person behind him was breathing on him, and he spun. But the nearest person was 4 steps away. Hideki shivered and turned to walk again. Was it the ghost of Ray? The ghost of his father? It was hard to know. It could have been the ghost of any of the thousands of other people who had died on Okinawa since the fighting began. The reek of death was everywhere. Another star shell exploded in the sky, and Hideki looked down at his cold, sodden feet. He was just thinking that maybe he should have waited until the American doctor brought back shoes for him, when he noticed the shoes underneath the bashufu kimono of the woman walking next to him. They weren't wooden sandals or tabi socks. They were leather boots. The woman wasn't a woman at all. She was a Japanese soldier wearing a kimono over his uniform. A quick scan of the feet all around him found more army boots hidden among the kimonos. Japanese soldiers had snuck in among their ranks throughout the night, hoping to slip through enemy lines with the refugees. Hideki's heart skipped a beat. He was in trouble. They all were. When American soldiers discovered there were Japanese soldiers hiding among them, The Americans would kill them all. But if he said anything now, raised the alarm, the Japanese soldiers would just as likely kill them all as spies. Or spies. Hideki slipped off the road, away from the refugees. He had walked straight with them for far too long. Evil was about to catch up to these people on both sides. Zigging and zagging, Hideki used the eerily illuminated Shuri Castle as a landmark and made his way further south on his own. He thought again about the cave with Yoshio and Private Maida and the old woman. Were the Okinawans safe? Did Private Maida still think the old woman was a spy? And what about Yoshio? How had he gone from being Hideki's worst enemy to Hideki's best friend? Not that he had come to Hideki's defense when Private Maida went crazy, but what could Yoshio have done really? What could any of the Okinawans do against the Americans and the Japanese? Hideki slid to the bottom of a steep ravine, where a body lay half buried in the mud. Another star shell exploded overhead, and in the light, Hideki saw that the fallen soldier was an American. That was unusual. The Americans usually claimed their casualties as soon as they could, taking them away to treat them or bury them. It was the Japanese who couldn't come out of their defensive bunkers to claim their dead. Hideki knelt by the body and went through the man's pack. There was food and a photograph. A pretty woman wearing a dress and sitting on a beach. The smeared imprint of her red lips decorated the bottom corner of the photo. There were more American bodies nearby, and Hideki hurriedly stuffed his own pack with as much food as he could from theirs. He kept all the pictures he found too, and adding them to Ray's collection. Their collection now. A single shot rang out, and a bullet whipped into the mud near Hideki. A sniper. Hideki dove behind one of the bodies. The sniper didn't shoot again, but he knew where Hideki was. Hideki cursed himself for his stupidity. There was a reason this ravine was still full of American corpses. It was too dangerous to come and get them. He must have wandered right into the no-man's land between the Americans on one side and the Japanese on the other. That meant that the slope behind him was occupied by the Imperial Japanese Army. If he could get to one of the caves inside it, he'd be safe. But if he stood, the American sniper would have a clear shot again. Hideki watched the star shell overhead growing dimmer and dimmer. He waited, his throat dry with anticipation, until the shell suddenly winked out and everything was pitch black again. Hideki leaped to his feet and ran up the hill, his bare feet slipping in the mud beneath him. For every meter he gained, he felt like he lost half a meter sliding back down. Bullets whipped into the hillside around him. The American sniper couldn't see him, but he knew Hideki would be running in the darkness. Hideki climbed faster, his arms and legs scrambling to push him higher. Higher. More rifles joined the first. The American sentries were taking pot shots at him, hoping to hit him in the dark. A battleship offshore fired another star shell. It whistled high into the air, leaving a glowing green-white trail. Any second now it would explode, the burning phosphorus lighting up the whole hillside. The American snipers would see him plain as day. Hideki's hand hit something wooden, a man-made ledge. The star shell burst overhead, and Hideki saw a small open window cut into the hillside, just big enough for him to crawl through. And the Americans saw him. Hideki tossed his backpack into the hole, his bullets shredded the wooden frame, then pulled himself through the window first. He hit the rock floor inside with a thump and scrambled back against the wall, as bullets pinged through the opening. He licked his dry lips and panted hard, but at least he was still breathing. He'd made it. But where were the Japanese? The bunker was empty. The Americans had been charging this hill for days, and couldn't even come close enough to collect their dead. Where are the Japanese soldiers with their rifles and machine guns and mortars? The American snipers stopped shooting. Hideki slid away from the hole in the wall, staying out of their line of sight. He crawled through a narrow tunnel to a larger cavern beyond, where multiple levels had been cut out of the rock. But the whole place was completely empty. Where was everybody? Hideki got goosebumps walking through the empty bunker. This place should have been teeming with Japanese soldiers. And it looked like it had been until very recently. The floors were littered with abandoned ammunition boxes, scraps of bloody bandages, and empty ration cans. But there were no people. Hideki wound his way through the tunnels to the opposite side of the hill, facing away from the American lines. There, another hole cut into the mountain framed the scene on the other side, showing him where everyone had gone. The Imperial Japanese Army was in full retreat. The roads south beyond the front lines were clogged with Japanese soldiers, all hurrying toward the next line of defense under the cover of dark and rain. When the Americans attacked the hill again tomorrow, they would meet no resistance. They would storm the bunker and find no one left inside, except for Hideki, unless he left right now. Hideki hiked Ray's backpack up on his shoulders, climbed through the hole, and ran. So we'll stop there. We'll keep posting these up on our YouTube channel. until we finish up the book. So have a great rest of the day. I hope you're taking care of each other and staying safe. And remember, Rangers the way.